all week long. One of my favorite parts of the show is the discussion with Jim Avila and Michael Shure. So let's jump right into it. We'll bring on Jim Avila, of course, a Peabody Award winner. He is an Edward R. Murrow Award winner as well. My journalistic crush, the former senior correspondent at ABC News and veteran White House correspondent, Jim Avila. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday to you. Michael Shure has forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. Welcome to the show, Michael Shure.
There's really not a lot to say about me when you said all that about Jim. I would introduce me first next time.
Oh, you want to do that? Okay, we'll flip-flop it.
Yeah.
Well,
it should always be. You should always be introduced first.
Well, I should be introduced first so we can get on to the feature player. That's the undercard, and then you go.
You're pretty awesome yourself, sir. I'll tell you that. This is a story I want to start with today, though, that I didn't send to you guys, but I'm sure that you've seen it, and I just did it in the news. But the story that the United States might send cluster munitions to Ukraine. I'm feeling like this. It's not something that sits well. What are you thinking, Jim? Let's start with you.
I was going to bring this up when you had a lot of other topics. I was going to say this is the story we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it is, I don't see an excuse for it. If you want to send F-16s, fine. The reason why they banned this particular munition is because up to 25% of them don't explode where they're supposed to explode, and they hang around unexploded for years and years, and kids, after the war is over, stumble onto them and they get killed. So there's really, and I've been reading about it. I don't see the real reason, other than Russia has them and they're using them, that we need to give them to Ukraine. It seems to me the rest of the world considers it a war crime, and it's like using landmines, and we don't do that anymore. I'm pretty upset about it.
Even the UN Secretary General has come out against us doing this. They says this is a bad idea. Michael Shure, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, it's the story we're leading with later today on the Young Turks. There's a convention on cluster munitions that was ratified by 123 countries. There are about 197 countries. And there are 12 that have passed but not ratified this. Of course, Russia, Ukraine, and the United States are not part of that. There is also the United States has a policy on cluster munitions, and the fact that policy exists is, it talks about those that are already in existence. This dates back to 2017. There will be no more procurement of cluster munitions, and the ones that we use will have to have only a 1%, not more than a 1% failure rate. In what's being written now about the cluster munitions being sent to Ukraine, they call it a dud rate, and those are what Jim was referring to earlier about those that don't go off when they are launched, but go off later, like landmines. And they're saying that there will be no greater than a 2.35% dud rate in those that are being sent to Ukraine, if in fact this is what happens. Now, being that the United States doesn't make them anymore or procure them, Russia is using them. Ukraine is saying they need them, and they need it for defense, not offense, which is, I think, going to be a lot of the writing and what is talked about here. Is they're saying in order to hold the line, in order to stop these vehicles, in order to stop the continued lines from entering Ukraine, they need weapons like this, and that's where the argument's going to be made.
I read that you talked about all the countries that have signed off that they won't use these cluster munitions anymore. The United States has not. The United States is not one of the countries that has done that. And that surprised me because it seems so barbaric. One of the things I was reading about these weapons, this from CNN, kind of describing what they do and how they work. Cluster munitions are, of course, as you said, banned by more than 100 countries because they scatter bomblets across areas that can fail to explode on impact and then pose this long-term risk to anyone who encounters them, similar to landmines, as Jim Avila was mentioning a moment ago. The Ukraine and the United States, not signatures to the ban. And I wonder why not? I mean, doesn't that seem like something a developed country who knows better ought to do?
There's fine print to that. I mean, Jim can talk about, when these things happen at the United Nations, right? Many of the countries that are on that list are Antigua and Barbuda, Samoa, Paraguay, Burundi, countries that could never develop these sorts of things. Though, in fairness, just about all of Western Europe is on that list of signatories. You don't see countries like Israel, where these things are made and where they're procured. You're not going to see them on this list. And the 1%, they lowered that 1% rate in 2017. It was changed in 2008, I believe, before that, but don't hold me to that. So the 1% rate of dud rate, to make sure that doesn't exceed 1%, is part of why the United States is still doing this. But they're not ordering anymore, and they're not using it for offense. It is for defense.
But they're not complying with the 1% either.
Well, we don't know that. We don't. They're going up to 2.35% now, which is clearly not complying with it, because they're saying.
So the ones that are going to Ukraine are not in compliance, even in theory, because they really haven't. From what I was reading, the testing is not really reliable on these older bomblets, and it may be higher. It may be as high as 20%, and that's what the problem was before.
It's hard to see, Jim, how they can control it. Like if you can have a 2.35% dud rate, why can't you have a 0? If there's a ground between 1 and 2.35%, why can't they control it more? The reason there's a dud rate, it's called a dud because it doesn't go off.
It's a malfunction, doesn't work.
Yeah. And if you could control malfunctions, you would, but you're allowing for it. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that is kind of a loophole here. But and I'm not saying it's a but. However, Ukraine is asking for these things because they say there is no way to control the ground forces and hold the line without being able to scatter munitions across the Russian line, especially to take out vehicles.
It's surprising to me, though, that a country would ask for these, knowing that, it could, even after the war ends eventually, it could kill your people for years to come. Why you would
what they're saying is that they're going to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What Michael says is true. What they're saying is that you're going to use them defensively and not use them in the forward push into Russia to push these people back. So if they're using them in their own country, they're jeopardizing their own people.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
it's going to be in their own villages or around their own villages, and it just makes no sense. I'm so against the Pentagon anyway that this kind of just falls into why are they doing it? Because the Pentagon can do it. Why have we not outlawed it in the United States? Because the Pentagon controls things and we don't, and that's the problem.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Let me just add to what Jim said, Kim, quickly. That part of this, the root of this, is that funding and support of Ukraine from average citizens as well as governments and NGOs is declining because of the fatigue of war in Ukraine. And they need, they're saying that they need these things because this is desperation now. And they've had from the very beginning a kind of kitchen sink mentality about this. Give us anything you can so we can push back this tyrant.
I envision the stories coming in, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, where I'll be reporting on a little child who lost a leg or a life or an eye. Or you've seen the stories, we've seen them from other war-torn countries. And, when you start using weaponry like this, that's what happens to these countries. It's not, the war doesn't ever really end. It just seems to linger and linger with people getting hurt. So it's disappointing that we would participate in that as Americans. Let us switch over to the crazy days at the White House, because there's some reports that came out about exactly what happened in the run-up to January 6th. And I don't know if you guys saw this story, but there was this heated Oval Office meeting on December 18th, 2020, where outside advisors faced off with top West Wing attorneys over a plan to have the military seize voting machines in crucial states that Trump had lost. They discussed naming a special counsel to investigate supposed voter fraud, and Trump invoking martial law as part of his efforts to overturn the election. There was shouting, there were insults being hurled back and forth in the Oval Office. It's described as complete and total chaos. It's an interesting look into what happened there. I don't know if you guys have a comment on all this. Let's start with.
Go ahead, Michael.
This was teased at the January 6th committee hearings,
Yeah.
and so we knew a little bit about what was there. But I mean, without knowing in great detail what happened, what this tells you, and this is something that we have talked about, Jim and I have talked about here a number of times, is that what Jack Smith is looking into on January 6th and in the lead up to January 6th, I think, and I maintain, is still going to be the most damning story in the Trump administration, in the annals of the Trump administration, and in terms of the future of Donald Trump and prosecutions and getting people to turn. So this is just a whiff of what I think we are in for, and there are probably analogous stories that happened in different parts of the White House and different parts of the Capitol.
And this, of course, this was Michael Flynn's idea. Crazy Michael Flynn. Okay, this is the guy who is way off the charts under the right, and what he was recommending was martial law to President Trump. And instead of kicking his ass out of the building, Donald Trump sat there and listened to it and wanted to know if he could do it. And his own White House lawyers, the guys who were really in charge of telling him what's legal and what's not legal, were apoplectic and telling him it's not legal. You can't do this. You can't use the military to go seize voting machines. So there's a lot of subpoenas going out now, I guess, testimony before the grand jury about this. And this is going to be very serious, not only for Trump, but Giuliani is going to be in big trouble because of this. And also, a couple other of his crazy attorneys. And I guess the head of the guy who was in charge of, what was it called? They sold Overstock.com. He was the former CEO of that, and he was one of those crazies. And he's now saying he'll testify. He's willing to testify about what went on in the meeting. He's kind of baiting Jack Smith, saying, "Send me a subpoena. I want to talk about it."
Yeah, that guy's Patrick Byrne, and the other thing to remember too is that Michael Flynn, we all know this, but he was someone who was indicted, convicted, and then pardoned by Donald Trump. So there's more to that story. We should never forget that there's a guy that Donald Trump pardoned, who then was going on to do what other lawyers in the room said was criminal.
And Donald Trump fired him. He was National Security Council. Trump fires him, and then he becomes a hero. I mean, later on, he becomes like best friends, because I guess because it's the old story with Trump. If you say nice things about him, he will do whatever you want.
It's shocking, and it shouldn't be, to me, that even these ideas were even being floated. And I guess, in a Trump White House, it's kind of par for the course. Martial law being considered to overturn an election? Sure. Why not? We'll think about that. Seizing the voting machines? Yeah, it sounds like a good thing. Let's consider put that on the list. Why not?
Remember what Trump was saying, Kim. Trump was saying to the Congress was, delay this.
Yeah.
Don't accept these electors, and we'll take care of it from there. And this was part of the plan. This is what he was going to do: is seize voting machines, declare martial law, put in these fake electors, and not to glorify Mike Pence, but he did one great thing in his life, and he stood up and he said no, he would not do that, and that prevented a real crisis. Not that there isn't a crisis already, but even a further crisis in this country.
I think I remember from the January 6th committee testimony, I forget who it was that said Rudy Giuliani called to ask them to do something illegal. And they said, I don't need you to do it for a long time, just for a few days. All we need is to set confusion. We just need people to be confused and unsure. The uncertainty is what we need. That's all we're looking for here.
They're looking for chaos. It's crazy.
Let's go to the House Freedom Caucus. They're not getting along very well. And I I don't feel bad for Marjorie Taylor Greene, but she has been given the boot. She is out of the House Freedom Caucus. I guess it's like Survivor, you know, they vote you off the island. This is a cast of characters that I can't believe anyone would want to be involved with anyway. But a vote was taken to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene from the House Freedom Caucus for some things she's done. Uh, that, according to Andy Harris, congressman from Maryland, who is the spokesperson for the House Freedom Caucus. They say she can no longer attend weekly meetings. They are reserved only for members, and she is no longer a member. It's the first time a member has been ejected from this caucus. Yeah, I don't even know how old this caucus is and whether that's something big or not. But she's out. And after this, she had this fight on the floor of the House with Lauren Boebert, where there was expletives used and finger pointing and hollering. It looks like Lauren Boebert won this round.
Yeah, I mean, although Boebert is allegedly supportive of Greene in this case, that she should not be removed from the Freedom Caucus. When you were too extreme, too out there, even for the House Freedom Caucus, it's saying quite a thing. I think the Freedom Caucus takes their work very, very seriously and their impact on Congress very seriously. And in fact, they have a big impact. They are probably the most impactful caucus, to be honest, in that they got concessions out of the soon-to-be speaker before he was elected that allowed his election. And so we make fun of them and we talk about how extreme they are. We can talk about how some of their members are just off the rails, but they are very impactful and they take their work seriously. And they thought that Marjorie Taylor Greene was a distraction, as sort of like that didn't help what their cause was on the Hill. And that's my takeaway from it.
Yeah, I think while the Boebert thing has been sort of the center stage of what supposedly happened here, I'm not sure that's really what it is. I think it is that Marjorie Taylor Greene has aligned herself with Kevin McCarthy and is defending him against the Freedom Caucus in many cases. You know, the Freedom Caucus would like to get rid of Kevin McCarthy, and Taylor Greene has kind of stood up to that and said that that she wants to keep him in because he has elevated her to such a big stance. He's even sometimes in charge of the House and sits up there as the acting speaker. So my suspicion is, while they haven't said specifically what it was, that I'm sure the Boebert thing didn't help. But I think her putting her feet in the sand and not wanting to move on Kevin McCarthy as quickly as the Freedom Caucus wants to, I think is the real cause. And just as an aside, the Freedom Caucus, I think, started, Michael probably knows this better than I, started during the Tea Party.
It's been a while.
It
was it before
later.
that?
It started later. It started in 2015, and it was started by Mick Mulvaney, who you may recall was the chief of staff to Donald Trump, who he now calls a born loser, who is now a contributor to a network called News Nation. But Mick Mulvaney was definitely the beginning of that. But it was thought of as a way of getting very, very conservative legislation to the floor and getting Democrats to vote in favor of things that were also kind of shocking as a headline, but not necessarily in the substance of what it was. So yeah, it started later than people remember.
I have video for this next story, which also relates to Marjorie Taylor Greene. So while Albert's pulling up the video, I also saw Tuberville commenting on this. These are people that voted against President Biden's infrastructure bill, and then when the money came to their states recently, have celebrated as if they somehow had anything to do with the money coming their way. I think in Tuberville's case, it was for internet infrastructure and providing more connections to people online in his state. But they're congressional representatives that took a stand against the president's infrastructure bill and now are somehow acting like they had something to do with the good things coming into their state. Let's watch the video.
Since I took office, we've seen over 60 domestic manufacturing announcements all across the solar supply chain. One of the biggest is in Dalton, Georgia. You may find it hard to believe, but that's Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. I'll be there for the groundbreaking. Since I took office.
So President Biden basically coming out saying, yep, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. I will be there for the ground cutting with this smirk. He gets some laughs, but she is one that came out against his bill. This was an event in South Carolina where President Biden was talking about the success of his economic agenda. I'm wondering if you guys think, is this par for the course politically? You know, even if you didn't vote for the, I've seen it in the past. So maybe if someone didn't vote for something, but then it ends up benefiting their state, to somehow spin it so they get to take credit for it, or is it just utter hypocrisy? Michael Shure?
It's politics. It's not, I mean, it's just the way politics works. People love to talk about what's going on in their districts, and they love to talk about what is going on. Their opponents love to talk about what could be going on in their district. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is a bit of a punchline for Democrats. She's a punchline for the president on occasion. And, you know, so I don't look too far into this other than this is, you know, typical, benign, right, even political grandstanding.
Jim?
Yeah. I'm shocked that there's hypocrisy in politics. Just shocked. Look, this has been going on not only with infrastructure, but with the other things that Biden has passed. When it finally comes down to the district level and the money starts flowing, these guys want to be at the McConnell did the same thing. Mitch McConnell was standing in front of the Covington Bridge, huge bridge that's being redone between Kentucky and Ohio. And McConnell, because he's from Kentucky, was there. And of course, he didn't want this infrastructure at all. So, you know, it's from top to bottom. And, you know, I think it's good for Dark Brandon to point it out. You know, he should be out there. You know, he's been very effective on this kind of stuff. You know, and
no, there's no question. This is a hallmark of his first term as well. And so I think that, and it's a great way to grandstand. And so when you have that, when you have something that helps everybody, but people voted against it, and that stuff is happening in districts of people who voted against it, it's not like he's going to win Taylor Greene's district, but it just sends that message that we're doing things and we're above the politics, even though it's politics.
I'm going to try to squeeze in this last story because it's something I hadn't really been paying much attention to. You're looking at Trump, you know, in the documents case, looking at Trump in the January 6th case, and the sexual assault case out of New York. But this one I hadn't seen, and a judge has just ruled that former President Trump can be deposed in a lawsuit from ex-FBI agent Peter Strzok. Is that how you say his last name?
Strzok.
He says Trump had a vendetta against him, and that he was wrongfully terminated after the Russia investigation, and he is suing. He said Trump criticized him in tweets that led to his wrongful termination, that the Justice Department wrongfully released text messages that he exchanged with a former FBI lawyer who was also suing. Trump is denied wrongdoing in this case, but yet again, it's another court case involving the former president. And I don't know if this one goes anywhere, but I think it's a big deal when a judge is allowing a former president to be deposed in a case. Jim?
The judge was kind of snarky, too. The judge said, I guess one of the defenses for not going to the subpoena is that he's busy. And she said, well, you're not too busy to file your own lawsuits, so I think you can come and take and participate in this one. Now, on the big picture of this lawsuit, I have to say Peter Strzok and his girlfriend did some pretty stupid things, in my opinion, and maybe he'll sue me. But he was an FBI official, and he did text that don't worry, this is before the 2016 election, don't worry, he's not going to be elected. We'll stop that from happening. And so that has been a text that is all over right-wing stuff and
Right.
is all, undercutting the Russia investigation, claiming it was, it was a witch hunt and all that other stuff,
Yeah.
much of it was because of these texts, and he shouldn't have sent them. Now, what Trump did after that, getting him fired allegedly, that's what the lawsuit's about.
Yeah.
So, do I have a lot? I mean, I see him all the time. He's on CNN. I'm kind of surprised he's on CNN as a commentator. What is your thought on that, Michael, about this guy?
Yeah, well, I guess that he's on CNN. That's part of the narrative of this case, is that he was defamed so much in the intelligence and in the justice community by Donald Trump that he can't get a job on that side anymore. So he's doing CNN. I sort of agree with you. It was really sloppy, but there was nothing that indicates that it affected his work.
No.
But again, the fact that Trump can be deposed and there's defamation involved in this case is consistent with what you would expect, even though Trump had been president, that he just railroaded this guy and continued to, and that caused harm to his career.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the former president's going to have to go back to court again. It seems like every time you turn around, Trump's going back to the courthouse.
Right, and that, while that he deserves it, that unfortunately feeds right into the right-wing narrative as well,
Right.
that everybody's after him, and it's not because he's been doing wrong according to the right wing, it's because everybody's after him.
Yeah, this last weekend I was in South Carolina for a Trump rally, covering a Trump rally and talking to people in line waiting to go inside, and all of them are calling everything a witch hunt. They're echoing what he says. Now, of course, they are sycophants, and they are, they behave in the way cult members behave in many ways. And so they'll say whatever his talking point is, but they believe it and they spread it, and they get it from people who have spread it themselves, that this is a witch hunt, and, keep bringing him into court, keep doing it, because his fundraising, and the numbers prove that, have gone up since he's been dragged to court. So, there is that risk.
Well, I thank both of you for being here today, and I adore both of you. Michael Shure, thank you so much for your commentary. It's always awesome. So thank you.
Let's go over Michael's. That's not fair.
Yeah, we have
to just
to
add. So
Yeah.
Michael was a national, international correspondent for Al Jazeera.
Right.
He worked for News Nation as a political correspondent, and now he's on the Young Turks. So he has a long list, and he's as opposed to me, who was all over the place doing all kinds of stuff like 2020 and other things. Michael's focused on politics. When I have a question about
ask him?
politics, I ask Michael.
Okay, there you go. See, little love for Michael Shure today.
We are a team. We are a team.
We are. Thank you guys for coming on the show, and we'll see you next Friday.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.